integral to the question of philosophy, not the question, but the sort of conviction that philosophy is a way of life. He says both in the text of Hadot, but also very explicitly in Phaedo, that philosophy is a preparation for death. So of course, Hadot's argument is a little bit different, even though he goes off from Phaedo, because for us, there's a definition of death there that we will discuss in Phaedo. Plato after, well, Socrates after saying that he doesn't know what death is, so therefore he is not really afraid of it, because this is at the end of these 5 dialogues in which we are going to the death of Socrates, that he was first in Euthyphro, the one we read, that he was accused and he goes to the court, and then in Apology he gives his defense or explanation or whatever, and then he's convicted, and then we learn that he wasn't killed immediately because, and that's also explained in Phaedo that we are going to talk about. And then at the end, he is at his, like, finally he's going to drink the hemlock and he's going to be executed, or I mean, I don't know what that means, like you drink your own, I think, whatever. So that was the Greek practice. And then what that means in terms of the his understanding of death. But for now, he is sort of setting up an opposition, Pierre Hadot does, in the case of Socrates being in a paradoxical situation with respect to his fellow human beings. And that's where I want to pick up. That's on page, at the very beginning of the section, The Figure of Socrates, section 3. And he says that we are not really talking about like the historical Socrates, because that's in a sense comparable to the question of Jesus Christ, that it is an idealized rather than a historical figure. And Plato is the one who is probably most responsible in idealizing this figure of Socrates. We don't know the historical figure, but we are talking about the idea. And one of the things about this idea, the most important thing, is this strange paradoxical situation that the philosopher occupies among his fellow human beings. Now, to see that specifically, we need to study Symposium, but we are not studying Symposium in this course. We are going to Phaedo, so I'm not going to say a lot about the dialogue Symposium, but what it develops is this idea that philosopher is not a wise person. So it is not sage, as, you know, when we read Pre-Socratics, Thales was, for example, one of the sages, right? Sage meaning like a wise person. So philosopher in Symposium is defined not as a wise person, because you only love what you are not, what you lack. So you love wisdom because you don't have wisdom. You are trying to reach wisdom, but you know you will never reach wisdom. And there is a separation, therefore, between those who are wise and those who are not. But among the ones that are not, philosopher is still different than non-philosophers. So those who are striving for wisdom is different than those who simply accept the way the world is and don't question it and assume that they have knowledge. So curiously here, among the non-sage, if you are a sage, that's cool. You have wisdom, you are a thing, whatever, but that's almost like a divine kind of state of being. But if you don't have wisdom, and if you don't accept that you have wisdom, you are actually worse off than someone who acknowledges and knows that they don't have wisdom. And that's really the paradoxical situation of Socrates. He tells other people that he is, I mean, he doesn't say it, but he is wiser than other people, precisely because he knows he's not wise. And that's the philosophical attitude, and people get upset, of course, with that. Why? I mean, just like the way we would today. If somebody says, I don't know anything, he was like, okay, go away. I want experts. I want people who know what they are talking about. This is really kind of, you know, today, if you, especially like to me, the paradoxical, like that philosophy and psychology will never sort of reconcile is that if you go to a psychologist, they tell you how to live, not explicitly, but at least they give you some expert opinion about what you can do in order to feel better in life. These are some of the things that you can do, and they operate with an assumption that they know the health of psyche. And that's a huge wisdom as far as we are concerned, right? Like if you assume to know what a healthy individual should be, right? That's significant knowledge. So what Socrates would have done or did was to really ask that question. What is that you think you know about how we should live? So ironically, the only good life that philosophy can offer is, it is good because it questions itself. It's not good because it has a property of being good. That's a very significant distinction. So now we understand good life as eating well, drinking and driving expensive cars, having a house. I don't know how we define being a good life is, but for Socrates, the good life is the only good life is the one that questions what a good life is. And that's a main distinction of philosopher from other experts who operate, maybe they don't say explicitly, but they operate with the assumption that they know what a good life is. Now, for us, that would be, what could we do with this to sort of, first of all, question whether Socrates is being ironic, or is he feigning ignorance, or is this a real ignorance? Now, it's a feigned ignorance with respect to people who claim to know. So when you are in the presence of someone who claims to be an expert, you immediately take this position of, well, I'm not an expert on this. And of course, you know this better, and you have like this vast area of knowledge, etc. But on the other hand, sometimes you just accept that. And then you say, oh, tell me what to do. How should I act? What is the answer to this question, etc. And I suspect that's really what we want. That's what we want from our leaders. That's what we want from our experts. That's what we want from our scientists. And honestly, we are really afraid of thinking for ourselves. And we should be. It is dangerous. We make grotesque mistakes. So we get mad at people who think for themselves. Like, who the hell are you to think for yourself when it concerns a question of scientific matter? You don't know anything. You shouldn't think for yourself. You should listen to other people, right? But on the other hand, we generally value the idea of thinking for yourself. I would think for myself, even though I wouldn't recognize other people's ability to, maybe, or you too, to think about certain things. So like if somebody says like, and you actually think that they're kind of crazy, right? Like if somebody says, I'm going to diagnose myself and cure myself, you go like, no, just go to the doctor. Like, why should you be responsible for your own health? That's very dangerous. They're telling you to wear a mask. Wear a mask. Are you crazy? That's it. There is knowledge there. There's expertise. We know for a fact that, and this is dangerous too, because if I question for myself what a good life would be, then I might die. But moreover, you also hurt other people too. Like, you not only have to conform to some kind of expert opinion, but also, like, if you don't, that's going to hurt other people too. So this is a very complicated question, actually. Yes, Jack.
Why do you think questioning happiness, or questioning what happiness is, will lead to your demise?
Oh, happiness? No. I mean, did I say happiness? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say happiness.
Okay, so do you mean like questioning our own existence then? Or
well, I mean, that sounds like when you put it that way, that sounds like a general, sure, of course. But what is that specifically? Can I question my existence as a mask-wearing person in 2020 in the United States? Should I question the expert's opinion of like, well, maybe putting a mask on kills me?
But I kind of feel like by saying that, by like questioning our own selves or lead to our own death, is kind of I think it's kind of giving some kind of essentializing what our existence is. Like you're assuming that if we do question our own like existence, let's just say, you know, we will eventually die. So which means that our existence is fundamentally negative and has no meaning. But yeah, so you're kind of just giving it some essence and giving it like a certain universal truth of existence to why we're here.
Am I doing this, or Socrates is doing this, or who is doing this?
From what you just said, by like when you said, if I question, for instance, my happiness or my existence, you know, I will eventually die.
Okay, let's just separate two things. I didn't say happiness, but you know, you should question our happiness. What makes you happy, and how much of this you learned from outside? How much of it is genuine happiness? Because a lot of people in life has this issue of a projection of happiness. Like if you accomplish this, if you do this, you are going to be happy. And then when you get to a certain age, you realize, yes, I have accomplished some of these things at least, but that didn't make me happy. So happiness, let's put that aside. What I was saying in terms of questioning experts in the context of health is dangerous in the sense of today, for example, if somebody says to me like, you need to wear a mask if you don't want to die or if you don't want to get COVID, right? So this is an expert opinion. That presupposes that that person knows something like an expert. Now, if I question that today from my perspective, then that puts me into a certain type of danger. Now, this doesn't happen in every situation, but I was just giving this example, like thinking for yourself is as an empty principle, we say it, think for yourself. But we don't really encourage each other to think for themselves because we want each other to obey certain expert opinion. That's what I was saying. Now, with respect to your own happiness, sure. I mean, and in fact, like what Socrates is saying is actually even stronger than that. He is saying that we should especially question the experts. Now, questioning doesn't necessarily mean disbelieving and believing that they are in some kind of conspiracy or they are like trying to dominate us or something like that, but really whether they are actually entitled to have the position that they do. Now, ironically, that's kind of the paradox of both scientific discourse in our contemporary society, but also in the role of the philosopher, because science is based on this idea of questionability. Like you should question every opinion, every scientific theory and test it, right? But you shouldn't because you don't know how to do it. So just because you have a snowball doesn't prove that there is no global warming. Now you are questioning in your mind the global warming hypothesis by bringing a snowball, but that's not really questioning. So you need to do it adequately or appropriately somehow. Yes, Jose, sorry.
Yeah, I guess I want to think, because you said health, right? Like we shouldn't, but when I think of it really, like we go to psychologists and they tell us what to do, like as an example, right? People go there, and it's kind of like healthy, and if you don't do that, or if you question them, then like there's a problem. Like if you just go and say, all right, like these people are just telling me to be happy, essentially, like they're not doing much, they're not doing anything at all, kind of like it's the same thing though. Like you can say health, and I don't know. I just feel like it's the same thing with like if us telling people wear a mask. You know what I'm saying? Sorry, it's a big
Well,
like.
I'm not sure what you are actually criticizing here. Now I don't want to get too much into psychology as a discourse. They might say, well, we are not really telling people what to feel or what to say, what to do, but we are just giving generalities. Usually people who do this are better off. Like that's the information that we have. So if you take this pill, there's a good chance that you are going to be okay, but there's also a 10% chance that you are not going to be okay, because 1 out of 10 people who took this pill had an adverse reaction or something like that. So they are giving you sort of general truths about what it means to be happy, what it means to feel okay, what it means to have psychological health, but not like imposing it upon you that you have to do it. So that's another issue. But here, well, it's not really another issue. It's the same issue. But this difficult situation, I mean, I want to emphasize the sort of not exactly paradoxical, but complicated nature of thinking for yourself. Now, thinking for yourself as a general principle appears to be reasonable. And we all say, yes, people should think. But this is where philosophy is always thought to be kind of abstract. But in fact, I believe philosophy is the most concrete, because in a concrete situation, thinking for yourself is a very different principle. So you don't want people to think for themselves in certain critical situations. You want them to obey. You don't want people to question. I mean, do you not make fun of people who question masks? You say, well, you should wear it, period. There is evidence. Don't think for yourself. You are stupid. Stop it and wear it. Yes.
Do you think it bears any significance on the issue of like questioning experts, like when it comes down to why that questioning is happening? Because like in my perspective, right, like I don't think that the vast majority of people in this country who criticize or question wearing masks are doing it because they're sort of seeking wisdom and thinking for themselves and being individuals. I think a lot of them are doing it because the sort of business owning class has spread an ideology of anti-lockdown and anti-mask wearing in order to increase their profits. So like, do you think that has any bearing on this discourse of like?
In this particular example, absolutely. And they might be motivated. I don't really know how certain people are motivated by, but what happens in society is that when you say, when you develop an argument because of your desire to engage in critical thinking, you are immediately associated with that ideological perspective of the other, and you are immediately dismissed. So you say, well, if you question masks today, you are actually serving that ideology of people who are anti-lockdown and they represent certain ideologies. So again, this is the societal pressure that, you know, we don't, even though we say, we don't really encourage each other to question. Now, technically, it would be possible to prove to those people, no, actually wearing a mask is good, healthy, you should do it. And they would say, oh, no, this is an ideology, etc. And then you say, oh, they are stupid, they don't understand, rather than I should be able to articulate why wearing a mask is, you know, advantageous or whatever. So again, these are all individual arguments, but what I'm trying to say is that having a principle in general, think for yourself, and actually employing it in society are two different things. It's very complicated because of the issues of like how you know, you are situated within a society. So Socrates therefore is put into question by everybody. He doesn't get his thing from the experts, but he doesn't get his props, or he doesn't get recognition from what he considers to be Democrats, sophists. Like, they question everything. They question everything indiscriminately because of ideological reasons, political reasons. They don't have a motivation. Now, for Socrates, the motivation is not to prove somebody's opinion wrong. It doesn't believe the experts or simply dismiss the experts, etc. None of them is what he is after. He is after to actually finding the truth and what would be a good way to live. Now, for that, knowledge is not just set of propositions, because that changes. What is considered to be appropriate changes, and it's possible, right? You know, without sounding too much like a Trump supporter, well, ex-Trump supporter. Anyway, so like when you say like, well, maybe there will be a critical point at which wearing a mask is going to be bad for our health in general. Just like a lockdown may, you know, ameliorate the immediate impact of the virus and the spread of virus, but in the long run, it's going to cause us a lot of other problems. This is to me, like a reasonable argument, which doesn't immediately imply that just because you have an opinion or your position and you are questioning, that you stop wearing masks, right? So that's not what it means either. Now, that kind of approach now is impossible, like as a way of existence, because you are either going to have to wear it or not wear it and suffer the consequences. So then the question is like, whatever you are doing as an individual is great, wonderful, but, and that's the other side of the argument for Socrates, you live in a city. City here represents like the social, political, economic context in which you are operating. You cannot think of your individual existence independently of that interaction. Therefore, it doesn't speak to us maybe directly when we listen to Socrates, because he lives in a city-state, Athens. 150,000 people, pretty much everybody, well, not everybody, but like people know each other. It's a kind of familiar context, and what other people do directly impact you, and you don't have this overarching, you know, state or empire that sort of makes the laws, etc. You make your own laws, you take your own father to the court and things like that. So you are much more immediately engaged with the social political context. Now, for us, it is entirely possible, and in fact, more than possible, but it is frequent, that people live without any kind of interaction with the social life. Yes, we go to school, sure, but it's a private institution. And then we don't, I mean, we go vote once in a while and then feel like we are having any kind of political participation, but we live our lives privately, pretty much. And you work for yourself, you struggle whatever issues you have for yourself, you make the decisions for yourself, and you don't really have the same kind of awareness of social and political context the way that Socrates did. So it's hard for us to just adapt his arguments and kind of accept it in our context. So it's a Greek society, it is ancient Greek society, it is a much more concrete manifestation of the social and political life. We have to be educated into that. We have to somehow learn about it. We need to learn our history. Our history is not something that is talked about constantly. It is not something that we associate with each other like in public spaces the way they did. So it's important how that manifests. I mean, if we learn anything from Socrates, it is important for us to understand how that would manifest itself for us, and not immediately say Socrates is right or Socrates is wrong, but how would I adopt that principle? How could I adopt that principle? How could I live according to that principle? So one important thing, though, is this conviction that Pierre Hadot constantly says is that knowledge is not a set of propositions. You cannot, it's not information. knowledge that gives you wisdom is not something that can be sort of, you sit next to the person, as he gives the example in Symposium, just sort of pour into the other person. And when you think about it, this is really how we approach knowledge for the most part. So when Socrates questions it, then we can, so how can I question my understanding of knowledge in terms of pure information? And this is really what we implicitly assume. Like you come here, you come to an institution, you give some money, and that institution gives you something in return. What? What does it give you? Knowledge, expertise. What does it do? I mean, it's your education. Invariably, like ask people in your life who graduated from college, like what do you remember from college? Have you ever done that? What do they say?
Usually not very much.
Usually nothing. So why are we doing this? Like what good is it? Like what is the point of this stuff?
I mean, the way I like to think of it for myself, in order to not be totally cynical, is that it's an exercise in learning how to learn.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. What does that mean?
That just means that, like, presented with any set of information or any discussion, I think there's a general skill to be built around critically approaching that information and that discussion and trying to make meaningful contributions to it.
I feel like it teaches you a certain way to learn. It doesn't necessarily teach you the way to learn. I don't think there's a way to learn. Like people out there who don't go to college or whatever, or just they have different sorts of knowledge. Like there's people who don't study biology, at least where I live, and they know all the birds there are. You know, like so I think, yeah, to say, you know, that there's only one way to learn. I'm not saying that you said that, but to say that, it's kind of like just putting academia in a good place that doesn't deserve.
Oh, privileged place.
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, yet the question is like, what is it that academia in its current configuration? And you know, when I speak, I only know like very limited scope of academia from like philosophy, humanities, etc. I don't really know that well of how like biology, chemistry, as disciplines, even in my school, but especially in other schools, operate. So I don't. So the question is, why do we privilege, therefore, academic learning? Not just me, I mean, I don't, but not necessarily. Why do we privilege academic learning? Yes, Charlie?
Maybe because it operates on kind of an accreditation based system instead of on an individualistic one. So you can go as like the professional world can judge people not on a case-by-case basis, which would be very difficult, but rather on where their degree is from and what that means. So like taking the understanding of the accredited thing over the understanding of the individual who possesses it.
Okay, excellent. Just let's think about that process of accreditation a little bit more concretely. What are we trying to give you then? What is the academia trying to give you? Accreditation, credit? What does that mean? More concretely, more specifically.
I mean, I kind of see it as the sort of process that gets kind of made fun of in Symposium. Like, I think we are kind of trying to pour knowledge into people's heads a little bit, but sort of knowledge in terms of things like concrete things that are sort of immutable and therefore could be problematic as like.
Okay. Well, why do we do that? Why are we trying, if we are, or if the academia is doing that, why is the academia trying to pour knowledge into you, knowing that knowledge might not even be valuable 5-10 years from now?
Because it's important to produce experts.
When you become an expert, what do you have?
A degree.
Well, yes, but like, why would that be good? Like, you just can hang the degree on your wall, but like, what does it give you?
Commands to give other people.
The what?
Like the commands to give other people.
Exactly, it gives you power. It gives you money. It's supposed to give you money, and it's gonna give you power. That's really what ultimately the transaction is about. You are, I mean, for better or for worse, for knowledge or not. Once you have that piece of degree, as Charlie was saying, you get that accreditation, you sort of like have a piece of paper. Then you are going to present that piece of paper that's going to give you power, money, influence, and ultimately privilege in society. So we are trying to create a set of people who will reproduce, participate, and somehow benefit from the way in which the society is configured today. That's the reality. So if you are accepting, like, I'm going to play this game, this is a good game, I'm going to get this influence, and then I'm going to get these privileges, and I'm going to play out these privileges in society. Now, imagine an institution that is, on the one hand, doing exactly this, trying to make you into individuals who are going to be successful within the system as it exists today, while at the same time giving you the impression that you are actually going to change that system. The question is, why should you? Why should you change a system that gives you privilege, power, and try to make that system more just and effective for other people if your entire motivation is to somehow operate and exist within that system? And now, system I'm not using in this sort of conspiratorial sense. It's really like the way in which certain institutions works in society today. Why do we criticize the issue of privilege in society constantly, while at the same time we are trying to prepare individuals who are privileged? So are we criticizing privilege, or are we criticizing the fact that some people have that privilege, others should have it too? But the model of privilege will remain the same. So people systematically going to be rich and poor, but we just want to make certain poor people also rich. Is that what we are trying to do? I mean, this is an important question at Earlham. I can only ask that question at Earlham because in other universities, they don't even ask that question. Like if you go to Miami, Ohio, it's like they are just there for the privilege. They are not even like, oh, am I going to make the world a better place? What the hell? I lived in Oxford for a long time, so that's why I have that prejudice against Miami. So what are we doing? What is the purpose of academia? Now we say, oh, it is privileged. And you say, Josue, quite rightly, well, like you can still live somewhere and know the birds without having a scientific study of the birds, etc. So we try to diminish the value of academia or think that it might not be as high, but we are using it in order to gain privilege in a society, and that we call that the reality.
So Ferry, do you think that, for instance, with Socrates, he was born with a mindset of, I'm going to question my beliefs, I'm going to question expertise? Or do you think it was knowledge and academia that gave him the tools to think like that?
Well, it certainly wasn't academia, because academy as an institution, as you read on section 5, was founded by Plato. So education was a natural, integral part of society, just the way maybe Josue was talking about knowing the birds. It wasn't just like a separate institution in which people are educated. Sophists are the one who introduced the exchange, like money. Like if I'm teaching you something, you need to give me something in exchange. And all of this is valuing the education of the individual on the basis of a democratic society. We want to be ruled well, therefore we are educating individuals. It was always, the beginning was that if people are going to rule themselves, if it is going to be a democratic process, they need to be educated. Now, if this was not a democracy, screw education, who cares? Education would be just like making certain people carpenters, the other one factory workers, the others blah, blah, and then just have a society in which you don't even have to worry about education. So I don't even know, like Socrates as an individual, what would that mean, that why he is questioning this. There is a certain crisis, a certain paradox within what we are doing and the recognition of that. Namely, on the one hand, we are pretending to work on making good individuals, like sort of ethical, moral individuals in some way, questioning what they are doing, etc. But on the other hand, we are producing the exact same thing that we are criticizing. Rance, do you have something? And then Charlie and Olivia, yes.
Yeah, I just had a quick thing. So should we be using? Should we be? Doesn't the Socratic always asking questions in class? Should we be doing that inside academics? Doesn't that really alienate people to an extent?
Yeah, absolutely.
So society should be more accepting of the culture rather than trying to understand our beliefs, basically, right?
Society should be more understanding of what?
We should be more open in trying to teach. In academics, we should be more interested in teaching rather than trying to question, correct?
Well, I think the issue here is that questioning is a way of teaching. Not like teaching information, but that attitude of questioning. Not in order to reject what you learned or what you are questioning, but something that you learn in and through questioning is still much more valuable than something that you just learn by heart. Isn't that like in education, we already say like everything that you learn by heart, the formulas, etc., you just doesn't mean anything. You don't understand how it works. Charlie.
So what's the point? Not what's the point, but what's the purpose of the teacher in this sense? If the individual teacher of an individual class in an academic system, what are they?
Well, are you asking this to me in general, or like, I don't know, every teacher responds to this question differently, but
What's yours?
well, first of all, trying to learn from Socrates that I should never be satisfied with an easy and cheesy answer to that question. I should never be like, this is my role and I'm comfortable with it and I go to bed and sleep at night very easily. That would be the sort of complacency. But it's always something that I ask to myself, namely, now that there is Wikipedia, what is my role really? Now that, you know, like if I were an electric engineering teacher in 1980 and my brother who graduated in 1980 and comes and tells me like, everything that I learned is now done by machines. So am I really, in a very literal sense, creating machines? Machines of people who behave in a certain way. So I guess if I were a science teacher, that would be my concern. In philosophy, I'm sort of like, I am trying to, like one thing that concerns me extremely is the fact that I do this for money, that I have a job, that this is my job to do, which pretty much questions everything that I say within that framework, because you are just like trying to give us something useful. And there is really no sort of philosophical self-righteousness as a result of the questioning and say, oh, I'm above everything, I'm doing everything right, and I'm doing like it properly, etc. That's the complacency. It is always a question. I mean, you can try to be honest and share it with that and then try to question that, but that's really the education. Now, on the other hand, it has implications, like, you know, what I was teaching in my mind 20 years ago now has had political impact, and now people are behaving in a certain way. That might be one sort of justification of, you know, doing that. So, and then constantly not being Wikipedia. I mean, that's the sort of analogy, sort of metaphor. Like, if you can get these things from anywhere else, if you can read Plato anywhere else, if you can learn philosophy from anywhere else, why should you be here? If it doesn't make a difference that I'm teaching it, which is completely different than how other people are teaching it, then what's the point? So again, you can only answer that question by doing it, not by saying it. Like, you cannot say and justify yourself and say, oh, I'm this kind of a teacher, etc., which would be wrong, which would be like a proposition, which would be like saying that this is the answer. But by keeping it always as a question, is that what is my responsibility as a teacher? And, you know, that will not always be a successful answer. Yes, Olivia.
So, I mean, from my perspective, part of the main reason that the main role that academia serves is like for my part, like I wanted to learn about these like decently complex theories in physics, and like I could just go online and read about them, but I didn't feel like I could get a comprehensive understanding of them, and college is basically the place where I could sort of make it compulsory that someone like sits down and explains it to me. And I feel like, you know, someone going into philosophy, like they might feel like, well, you know, I read Phenomenology of Spirit and it just bounces off me, and I need someone to give me a more like grounding and explain the different takes on different sections and things. And like, just because someone is doing that for you doesn't mean that you can't be critical of that, the ideas that they present to you, but sort of that college is a place where like you get up to speed and like you get this sort of basic almost historical background in any given idea, such that you're able to question it and really engage with it.
No, that's a good, well, thanks. That's a good way of explaining it. I think that this really touches upon, so, I mean, I want you to think as a result of Socratic thinking, for example, what we are doing in the 21st century Earlham College post George Floyd context. Like, we are trying to be sensitive to what we are teaching, how we are teaching it. Whether this is perpetuating justice in society or somehow reproducing certain oppressive structures in society. And then we are questioning what we teach, not just how we teach it, but what we teach. So when I read Socrates, I am asking this question to myself very seriously, actually, ever since, you know, this especially, as to why the Greeks? Why the Greeks? Why do we construct our identity, acceptability in terms of our relationship to the Greeks? Are we not somehow thereby isolating our identity from a tradition that comes from Egypt, that comes from China? Are we so immersed in a certain way of seeing the world historically and perpetuate that constantly, because the Greeks have been taught for centuries, and create an identity that necessarily excludes certain people? I mean, the reason I feel this is because I didn't associate myself with the Greeks. That's not I didn't see that as a part of my tradition as a teacher. But on the other hand, this is the paradox that I am perpetuating as an individual. Now, of course, you can say, like, as an individual, you can sort of always sort of redeem yourself, etc. But what is the structural issue? Why the Greeks? Why Plato? Why Socrates? Why is it that we are not learning how to think from a Chinese tradition, from an Egyptian tradition? Why is it just for the Greeks? Are we not contributing to an unjust world in which certain people are systematically privileged, even though you can change the identity of those people? you are systematically privileging certain people over others. Because if it is us, we don't see it. Because we created a discourse of sort of, as long as you can see yourself as a part of victim, you don't have to be concerned about the way in which you are victimizing other people. So I can develop a discourse like philosophy is always like pushed aside and somehow not valued in academia. Philosophy is an underprivileged discipline, etc. But that sort of makes me blind to how philosophy actually contributes to the oppression of people. The same thing should be said about the science. Science says, oh, science should always be privileged. Science like STEM, etc., it is wonderful. That's going to solve our problems, etc. Not recognizing that the European colonialism is intimately and inextricably tied with European science. And not recognizing it because now you feel yourself underprivileged, and then how you move out of that. The Europeans, like, oh, we were in the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, oppressive, terrible European, etc. All this story. And then with modernity, it's almost like the sort of rebellion of the victim, like the Europeans were in the Dark Ages, so we are going to dominate the world in the next 400 years. That to me are questions that only human beings can raise and deal with. And if we have any hope of not completely being automatized in terms of our behavior and act reflectively with respect to our actions, that's the only justification for education. Otherwise, we'll just keep churning out people. Like, you are not any different than anybody else. Somebody can do what you do better than you. And then you will notice that in 5 years after college, you'll say like, somebody can do your job better and cheaper 5 years from now. And if I have a job that somebody can do better and cheaper in 5 years from now, I might as well not invest anything in education. And this will happen. I mean, I'll demonstrate to you tomorrow in my sort of sort of statistics about philosophy. That's really what's happening. People are changing jobs 17 times. People are retooling themselves. People become redundant redundant. Like you spend all this money on education and you become redundant. And we are in a very critical sort of constituency too, because Earlham is not a privileged institution. Like if you have a degree from Harvard, you're always going to, find a sucker who is going to do something for you. And you probably have rich parents, or like your parents, your friends have rich parents, and they'll perpetuate that privilege. But you are sort of in this place of like privilege and not privilege and negotiating.
Isn't that the best place to be though, as far as growth is concerned?
Well, sure, I would say that, but somebody would say, no, the best place would be a Harvard alumni who has a Harvard alumni parent who already donated a, hall to Harvard, and then you live your life in privilege. And then you can also criticize yourself. And it's like at Earlham, we are talking about like, and I do that too, like, oh, we are an institution for peace and justice, and we really care about the world, and we are this and that. This is all wonderful, great aspiration, but do we really? And to what extent should we? I mean, this is an institution in which people plug down money to come in. So are you willing, in order to improve the world, to make Earlham free? Which I have been arguing unsuccessfully for 20 years.
Is Earlham not free because of principle, or because of the actual practice of not feasibly being able to
For economic
support itself?
But also like sort of thinking, okay, so I can't record this part. I want to go back to this description of Socrates on page 30 of the figure of Socrates. When first he says he is an individual, and we need to be specific about what that means in the context of the Greeks. He gives the example, Pierado does, like it's an individual as a unique and unclassifiable personality. And he makes reference to Kierkegaard, who is a 19th century philosopher. So Socrates is impossible to classify. That's really the claim here. He cannot be compared with any other person. At most, he could be compared with Silenoi or satyrs. He is atopos. Topos, topographical place. Like he doesn't have a place. He doesn't belong to any place. Meaning strange, extravagant, absurd, unclassifiable, disturbing. And I'm utterly disturbing, he says, I only create perplexity, aporia. So he doesn't really fulfill this two way of understanding knowledge at the Greeks at the time, because he doesn't take life and knowledge, refuses to take oneself seriously. Now, by that, I don't think that he means like he makes fun of everything. He's just sort of pure irony, etc. But understands what is important in life. And what is important in life is how to live. How should I be? Not whatever society tells me to do in terms of money, privilege, etc. So he's not like aristocratic of knowledge in the sense that those who claim to be the experts, but he is not exactly democratic either in the sense that it can be everybody. Because of the sophists, them teaching everybody in exchange for money, they really undermine the kind of value of knowledge too. So there is this really in between atopos, a place that is not really a properly expressible position. So on the one hand, no, it's not the expert. But on the other hand, it is not mean like, oh, everybody can do whatever they want. That's really where he's at, because one of them represents poverty and complete lack of knowledge. The other one is like poros, which is like incredible aristocratic knowledge. So Socrates is in between. So the democratically, we say, that's what we say today. Everybody is entitled to their opinion. That would be, again, an empty and general statement if we were not living in a society in which, no, not everybody is entitled to their opinions to the extent those opinions have consequences for other people. That would be an abstract, comfortable position to say and get rid of it. Like, I'm tired. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to negotiate opinions. That's too much. And it's animosity and people are fighting on social media and stuff like that. So you can just easily say, oh, everybody is entitled to their opinion, and kind of protect yourself from any kind of involvement with that, which would be okay if you were just living by yourself and not influenced by people's opinions, because people vote on the basis of their opinions and policies are made on the basis of the opinions that affect your life. So you are not really sort of privileged to say like, oh, everybody is entitled to their opinions, everybody has their own perspective. But on the other hand, you can also like, only this person knows it. And this is our other extreme, which is really the dialectical opposition of the first position. Since everybody has their opinion, one person, the leader, the expert in most cases, I'm going to follow that person. Either case, I don't need to think for myself. In either case, I'm either going to be like absolutely following one position like an aristocrat, like, you know, whoever that person is, my leader, or I will follow nobody. But it's never in this position of like, I'm going to follow myself. I'm going to try to find it for myself. And most importantly, I'm going to do this in the context of a social city or country or a community. It is never by myself in the sense that I'm going to withdraw from all the other considerations, because for Socrates, the care of the self is always care for others. So he makes that case that Socrates is actually in the symposium, like talking to people, engaging with other people. He is a constantly social being. He is interacting with other people in order to improve those people. Not by like an expert, but by philosophy. Of course, he's a mythical figure, and it is kind of ironic as well that he was killed. Like, I mean, that really sealed his reputation, because if they had just said, oh, Socrates, just hang out here, it doesn't matter, he probably wouldn't be. Like, imagine like, you know, Christ would have been probably a different figure if he wasn't killed, like once, like, you know, crucified. That really seals his reputation. Well, here, oh, there's a question on by Keith that's private, so I'll just read it. Socrates said, I never stop showing what I think is just. If not in verse, I show it by my action. And the question is, do you think Socrates act virtuous? And he improved people by the way he acts. So he never really concedes the fact that you can act virtuously in a non-virtuous society. And that's really his motivation in action. Namely, you as a person, as an individual, cannot be virtuous or just unless you live in a just society. And that's really something for us much heavier, because it's easier for him to say in the context of Athens, but it's probably a little more difficult for us to imagine, like, do I believe that I live in a just society? You probably don't, do you? I mean, I don't know. Does anybody think that this is a just world? Or you live in a just society, whatever that means. I mean, of course, you cannot know the definition maybe, but at least you observe a lot of injustices in society. So is it just for you to have a good life, knowing that you live in an unjust society? I don't want to make you depressed, but do you deserve the right to be happy? Do you deserve the right to have a good life? Or is that a separate question that's individually sure, but as a social being, no?
I feel like that's what people use to justify themselves so that you feel good about yourself while excluding others. Like, say, I don't know, like rich people, white people, sort of, yeah, I mean, like, why wouldn't I be happy? Like, I don't know, I just feel like that can be dangerous. It can be used in many ways to just justify your place in the world and then forgetting about what that place means and holds and represents for other people who are not, let's say, male, heterosexual, white.
Okay. Well, is that the injustice? Is that the injustice that certain people are historically, traditionally more powerful than others? Is that the injustice?
I think that contributes to much of the injustice in our society.
Okay.
I feel like if you phrase it like that, then it sounds like it's not, but it is, because you are, like, the mere existence of you predisposes other people who are not like you to be inferior. So, like, of course, if you say, is that injustice, then you think, no, I have the right to exist. Like,
No, I wasn't asking like that. Okay, yeah, you're right. But like, is that what injustice consists of? Like certain people having certain privileges and others not? Or certain people having their privileges at the expense of other people? Or is it that we are going to change, like whenever we talk about the arc of history towards justice, etc., like once we change who those people are and those who don't have privilege now have privilege, are we thereby going to produce a more just society? I don't expect answer, but go ahead.
I mean, I think a lot of the thing about like injustice in our society is that the things that we value as privileges, such as having money or having power, necessarily come at the expense of other people. There's no way to become rich without exploiting and harming other people. There's no way to hold power without either advertently or inadvertently harming other people.
Okay, then are we talking about some kind of an Anaximander worldview here, where we are going to do justice and pay penalty according to the passage of time? Or are we talking about justice in a more sort of fundamental way, in which is it even possible to ask the question whether we can create an existence in the world that is not going to systematically privilege certain people over others, regardless of who those people are? So if an injustice done to you, does that give you the right to do injustice to other people?
yeah, that's interesting. Especially here where I am, like in Latin America, like a lot of people think that because you are from Latin America, then you have, like, let's say me, right? Then I have the right to sort of talk about whatever I want because I'm from here. And honestly, it's the same thing. Like, I feel like people here now, like Latin Americans, are the ones who exploit indigenous people. Does that make sense? Like,
Absolutely, it makes
in
sense.
terms of
Yeah.
coloniality. Like, I feel like we don't have, it's the same thing. Like, we sort of take the place of the colonizer now.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh yeah, sure, we're like brown people or whatever. But yeah, you have some sort of like role, like some sort of place, you know. So yeah.
I think here the philosophical question is, are we conceptualizing justice on the basis of the individual identity or structures within the system that we are operating with? Now, we most of the time talk about it in terms of the individual identity of the people. Now, like, for example, in the context of the United States, you can learn something from post-colonial theory, where there is this, actually, ironically, the Portuguese or Spanish word comprador, which just because you are from somewhere and somehow structurally became the victim doesn't mean you cannot victimize yourself and your people. So it is much more complicated than identity gives you this kind of passage or sort of like pass that you can sort of, there's always injustice done to me, because we are very good in thinking the injustices done to us, but it's not maybe as reflective as the way in which we do injustice to other people. And sometimes even in our quest to look for justice. And that's really complicate things for Socrates, especially because if you look at him, he is not like supposed to be a victim in a society. He is actually the person who is fighting for the city. He is always around there, etc. And he ends up being killed at the end. So he is the one who is victimized. If you look at him from outside, you would think that he would be like the privileged white Greek, right? But then he was killed. So the issue here is what you do with who you are, rather than thinking of yourself in terms of categories that may or may not impact your behavior. So that's the question of like identity, which we are going to discuss in post-colonial theory a lot, because there is this kind of presumption that you understand an individual in terms of a category, and that fundamentally defines you. So if I say, Josue, you are from Costa Rica, so you are a Latino, so this is who you are. Therefore, you either speak like a victim, or I can't even imagine you victimizing other people, which you say we do indigenous people. But what does indigenous people mean? Like, are they all like the same? There are indigenous people who will exploit indigenous people. So this is really not a sort of uncomplicated issue of identity. And by constantly asking yourself this question, that's the only way that you can understand your identity, not in terms of some general political historical categories, which are important, but they also need to be questioned. So for example, like, we are very, very happy Kamala Harris is our vice president. Think about Kamala Harris as a person.
Yeah, I was reading, it was a tweet or something, but how people were like completely surprised in the US about Latinos voting for Trump. How like people were like, oh my God, like, how are you voting for Trump? And then I was just thinking, dude, like, well, first of all, like, if you come to Latin America, people vote for people like Trump all the time. Not, and then secondly, like, I mean, are you saying then that people just sort of like, because they're from Latin America, they should vote for somebody specifically? But the point is, like, these people are, and they've always been the sort of colonizer. Like, this is the white people in Latin America.
Sure.
These people from Florida, Cubans and whatever, who voted for Trump, they've always voted for these kind of people. And I think that that needs to be said, because like there's this super like absolutism categorization that like, you know, that doesn't, like, you're the victim, you know, like sort of thing. So yeah, someone was saying in Twitter, like, yeah, these people have always existed. Like, I'm sorry, but I think you just don't know it and think that, you know, just because you're brown and like, or whatever, just because you're from Latin America, there's no these kind of people. Of course not.
Yeah, no, that's precisely the problem of identity, because that's like, if you understand yourself in terms of that category, I mean, on the one hand, you claim like, you might claim like, I'm Latinx, therefore I'm entitled to certain discursive privileges. But on the other hand, you might be voting for Trump. Yes, Isaac. Ah, we are talking about politics now. Okay, good.
I was just going to add that it's really easy to say that we should just treat everybody as individuals and try to get rid of identity, but in a lot of ways it's like, sorry.
Who said that?
Well, I think that, but
Okay.
for one, I think we
blame us.
agree
Just kidding.
that people should be treated more like individuals, like Josue is saying, but at the same time, like Trump really does have views and policies that are like negative towards Latinos in general. So it like that person on Twitter has some point there that like, even though like all these categories are arbitrary because they've been historically part of the system, they're really there now.
But I mean, he was specifically, I mean, okay, we don't need to record this part, but it is not something that is detached from the society, because these people go to public life. And it says like some of them were judges, they were participating in the political life of Athens, etc. So he is thinking the model, a community of love, people who have biological friendship, those who can establish certain relationships and they can model these relationships in society. So we like fight, we like intolerance really in our positions and expect tolerance in general, but really value intolerance. Like the more determined, the more intolerant our leaders are, the better. I mean, you know, people, you know, lost election because of flip-flop. Like, you know, oh, you are flip-flopping, you are changing your mind. What a stupid idea. It's like, yeah, I mean, if there is a better idea, I will change my mind. No, you should just be determined in your dogmatic conviction for an idea. Which, again, if you do not participate in these practices in society, like academia, as Plato says, or any kind of educational system in which you are engaged with these positions, then you are not going to model that in society either. So more and more we are becoming more entrenched in our political position, and especially in academia. And maybe as an academic, I'm responsible for that too. Certain positions are unacceptable, but those positions exist. Those positions unfortunately exist, or fortunately, whatever, in society. So how do we deal with those? We almost exclusively value intolerance and stubbornness and stability over the ability to change. So education is really that, like that kind of Socratic moment is like, yes, I might have a position, I might have it, but I'm always questioning that with the possibility that it might be different. And that's really the first step of the political. Because if you know that you're always right, you really don't need politics. You just need coercion. If you think that you're right, you don't want to engage other people. You just have to convince them. And the best way to convince them is through coercion. And that's what we are doing to each other. social, political, military, economic. We are coercing each other to behave in a certain way. Yes. And we are complaining about that too. Yeah.
Does application and maybe innovation in an industrial or just, I guess, any kind of sense, is it reliant on a lack of this mode of thought? Like, can you have this mode of thought and still apply and innovate? Because in application and innovation, aren't you kind of holding steadfast one belief that you can create something based off of it? What if, I guess, like, especially long-term application or innovation, it kind of relies on you holding the same thought about a thing, or else it won't get completed. Because if you I'm just thinking about like working on something that's going to take a year or two, and 6 months in, you have an epiphany via questioning or conversation where everything that this application is predicated on has fallen to the wayside, and some new idea has been born, which disproves or proves the trivialness of whatever you were doing.
No, that's a great question. I mean, I would recommend really for you to think about the nature of analogy in whatever you are sort of bringing these questions. Analogy is this like really complicated issue. It is similar, but not the same. So you can bring an analogy from innovation or technology or something like that, while it is relevant for how we should think about the political life, maybe, right? How we make decisions, etc. But is it really possible to apply it as if it is the same thing? So the same thing with metaphors. Like human thinking is complicated. So we say like, oh, we do this like this in economy, therefore we should do it in here too. It's like, yes and no. There are certain aspects of it that might be applied and certain aspects that might not be. So that's the nature of metaphor. So sure, I mean, yes, it makes it complicated, but what is the point of political life? Like, what is the point of political life? Like creating a correct way of living for everybody, creating prosperity, creating a just and wonderful society, or complete representation for other people. Why are we doing this? What is the purpose of political engagement? Is it to impose our power upon other people? Is it bringing about a certain worldview to the world that is what we consider to be just? Or is it really an art of living together? Yes, you are going to live with what you consider to be horrible people. That's life. I do it all the time. Not maybe in the same that we understand it, but this is an art of living. That's about like, you are not going to annihilate them. In order to have a just society, unfortunately, you won't be able to eradicate every single racist person in the world. They are going to exist. And then the question is, why is it that we are engaged in this project? Yes.
But in the existence of people with unjust ideologies and positions of power, thus injustice is perpetuated in the world.
Sure.
So the idea of a just world can never exist.
The idea can certainly exist, but if you are going to bring about that world by genocide, then no, that's not going to be a just society. And sometimes you also need to think, okay, who is more responsible for the injustice in society? The farmer in rural Indiana who I consider to be racist, or the CEO of Amazon who I don't necessarily consider to be racist because he is really saying all the right things and giving the proper charity to proper organizations, but also at the same time creating this injustice, contributes to the injustice. So certain people have ideologies. But what are they really doing to society? You know, you don't leave that small town and you live there for the rest of your life. You are voting sometimes, etc., as opposed to the Apple who is exploiting children in China. But I sort of think, oh, that's cool because Apple is not racist. That to me is like the question that we can ask both with respect to ourselves, like, am I even identifying the correct problems in society? I don't even know that I am identifying correctly how injustice is produced in society or how we can bring about justice. I see certain people and say, oh, these people are exploited, therefore I should just make sure that those people are not exploited anymore. But am I in the process exploiting other people? Okay, these are questions that we are going to address a lot in post-colonial theory. So I don't even know why I'm talking about this now. Because this is exactly Socrates sees the role of questioning. I mean, I'm a